we have to talk about consciousness. Our life is actually a midpoint between the two deaths. To use the sexual energy in order to achieve enlightenment. The three-dimensional spiral shape encoded in our DNA, in our biology.
Hello, one and all, and welcome once again to a brand new episode of the Discomfort-Zone podcast. That's right, I'm here, Olev, as always. Well, I say as always, I actually wasn't here last week. Apologize to my listeners for disappointing. I'm afraid, I couldn't make it. But we're back now. We have a new episode out this week, and I'd like to welcome Crimson Clad, Rondon, and Abigail Honey for being here on time, I think ahead of me, some of you, so very much appreciated. Always lovely to see your avatars in chat. And actually this week I have a couple of announcements to make before we start the actual episode. So as you know, there's actually no adverts on the podcast. So this is a one-off, but I decided to dip my toe into the water of advertising. And no, I'm joking. But actually, I came across something this week that I felt I really had to share with all of my listeners. Obviously, the ones using Hive, who may be listening to this and haven't heard of it, and especially also those who are not yet aware of Hive and who might be interested in listening to the podcasts. There is a new podcast DApp that can connect directly to your Hive account. Now, I'm glad that Krim, you're here, and Rondon, I don't know if you're aware, but call me out. Make sure that what I'm saying is correct, because I can't say I 100% understand everything, especially not the technical jargon. But what I do know is that it's called Aureal, Aureal, and it's a brand new podcast app that's in development right now. And it's basically going to have podcasts for you to listen to that are, I think, primarily geared towards all of our wonderful Hivians who are creating all this incredible content. So it's an amazing project. I know that it's still underway now and it's being developed, but make sure you stay tuned to that. If you want to check it out, you can actually download the app. I have done so myself. The DZP podcast is actually available right now on Aureal. I haven't published all of my episodes there. I haven't published all the episodes on Hive, so you won't see anything on my account. But if you go into the app, then all the episodes are available, all the ones that have been so far, and obviously I will continue to update it as we go. So I don't know about you, but I'm very excited. I do try out quite a few podcast apps. I listen to quite a few podcasts, and I have to say that so far it's looking really great. They are very responsive and making it really, improving it. It seems every day. So I'm very, very happy, and I really wanted to take this opportunity to share with any of you who might not have heard Aureal. I think it's pronounced Aureal. I assume Aureal. Check it out, look it up. It's amazing, and you can download the app. So that is the first plug. Yes, exactly. Right now, we really want as many people, the developers, and myself included, just get the word out. It's a great new app with lots of cool features, and you can really connect it to your Hive account if you have one, so you can support podcasters directly from the app, which I think is very, very cool. As a creator myself, I'm very happy about that. But yeah, you know what? I'm definitely not a spokesman because I don't know anything about it. There's a lot more cool features that I don't know about. So yeah, just check it out. Do yourself a favor, and I promise you won't regret it. And yeah, Krim, if you want to add anything. Nice. And above your anchor tools. So many cool features to add over and above your anchor tools, etc. Okay, yeah, so there's lots more things. So that is that. I wanted to start with that. And the other thing is a shameful self-plug. But I think it's a good platform to do it, and I hope you'll forgive me. But it's just a very exciting development for me and for us here. And those who have been here from the beginning will know that this podcast actually started out as part of the Eco Village plan sort of design as a general theory, and we have since made some shifts and some changes. But I have to say that in my personal life, I am much more involved in sustainability and regenerative agriculture and all of these things than I am in actual conspiracy theories. Although, obviously, I do the podcast and I'm very much inside that world in a day-to-day life situation for me. I have to say that most of my time goes towards some form of developing the eco-village. And due to this, or part of this, I should say, as some of you may know, we actually started a company, which is a company that is a private company that is rather, we wanted it to be very free and very flexible in the services and the activities that we could conduct with the company. And so primarily the company is categorized as a sort of water management, water system design company. We deal with wastewater and with rainwater harvesting, etc., etc. But besides all of that, there's obviously the whole part of the eco-village that will be eventually incorporated into this company. But for the moment, as a first step, before we go too far into the future, I have a project, a passion project that I'm very, very excited about, that I've been sort of planning and thinking about for a long, long time. And I'm pleased to announce that we are really in the final steps. And so part of the company's name is Abundant Wisdom. So I'm going to refer to it as AW because it makes it easier. Part of AW's services right now are going to include consultancy, specifically in the field of water management and rainwater management. And so if you have a piece of land, or you know someone, or you're planning to, or you would just like to learn more about water management on the land, how this can be done to benefit yourself, then I'm very pleased to announce that we will be starting our activities in the near future. So this is sort of a cold open. We're actually going to do some market research, and I want to see what kinds of services people would be interested in, from sort of surveying the land and designing a system, all the way to 3D modeling, or if it's more online webinars or online consultancy. These are sort of different avenues that we're thinking of going in, and I'd like to hear what people think. So if any of this is relevant to you, and any of you would like to know more, then I'm going to put a link in the episode's description to what we've started with, which is a Facebook group, which is a very humble beginning, but we have to start somewhere. And there we're actually going to start publicizing the services and what we are planning on doing. So if that interests you and you're listening to the podcast, then you can head on over to the group and check it out. And you know what, for the people in chat, well, you know what, at the end of the episode, I'll link it to the chat as well, because I don't have it ahead of me now. So that's that. If any of it interests you and you'd like to hear more, you can look up Abundant Wisdom LDA on Facebook. You can email us at abundantwisdom.lda@gmail.com. And I look forward to letting you know how that develops, and when we actually have more to inform you. Okay, so now that we've finished all of the boring adverts, I should tell people who are listening just to skip 10 minutes for those who don't hear it, but we can actually get down to this week's episode. So, and I can see actually we've got Darsico and Kyle. I call you Kyle. I think we've talked about this before, but it's just my dyslexic thing. But welcome, and thank you very much for joining. You haven't missed anything so far. So we're good. Oh, and Avian. I didn't even see you at the top of the chat. Welcome as well. I missed you above the bots. Great to have you all here, and we have a fantastic episode this week. Oh, nice. Yes, rainwater catchments, and indeed sort of the general design of the water system as part of the land is a huge, huge subject. I won't get into it now. Maybe I'll do an episode one day. I think I did an episode on keyline farming. If you want to check it out, I think it's like one of the first 10 episodes. You can hear a little bit about it there as well. But for now, let's get on with the episode. So, to remind you, just a quick recap in case you weren't here last week, we were speaking about Akhenaten and his reign in ancient Egypt and his role that he played within the Tat Brotherhood. And we sort of had a quick rundown of his life and his time as the ruler of Egypt that was very short, only about 17 years. I think 17 and a half. And in the end of it, obviously, the military and the priests sort of ganged up and had a coup and removed him from his position. And that was basically the end of that short period of time. And looking at it, as we sort of mentioned, historically, the people who were investigating might not see too much to it, and just the king who was there for a short period and did some strange activities and then disappeared off the map. But as we, or I should say, as Drunvalo makes it clear to us, this is actually only part of the picture, and this is what was supposed to happen. And the reason Akhenaten behaved the way that he did was that he had a very short period of time to achieve what he was meant to achieve. As we said, the ability to sort of reopen humanity's ability to ascend to Christ consciousness, to achieve immortality, as Drunvalo calls it. And we spoke a bit about the differences there. So that was more or less where we left off last week. And so this week we're going to go a bit deeper into what exactly Akhenaten's message was. And I have to say that I don't have the whole book in my mind sort of laid out. I do go over and research the episodes, and when I saw what we're talking about this week, this is one of those pieces of information that the moment I heard about it really, really stuck with me. And I feel that it's a very sort of crucial, simple, and very impactful piece of information, knowledge, wisdom that can help the way that, or change the way that we see the world. So I'm very excited about this weekend. I don't want to make the big mistake of building it up too much, because that's always the problem. But before we actually get to the knowledge itself, the information, we'll carry on with just a little bit more background that Drunvalo gives us. Now, I feel I must confess that Drunvalo does add a lot more information and knowledge and backstory to all of this. He has a whole part, I think I mentioned, about the skulls and proving Akhenaten's life, and a lot of information about the archaeology of Egypt, etc., etc. But I don't think that's as relevant for what we want. So we're going to try and understand the picture, as we always try to see the patterns. And what basically happened was, in Egypt, there already was a mystery school, which we've mentioned, called the Left Eye of Horus. And the Left Eye of Horus, as we know, the left eye actually sort of crosses over and is controlled by the right hemisphere. And so we've spoken about this a little bit, the two hemispheres, right-handed and left-handed. It's to put it in that terminology, the right hemisphere is the feminine side, the intuitive, artistic, non-linear, experiential, and the left hemisphere is the masculine, the analytical, logical, etc., etc. And so the emphasis on Egypt until then, in terms of the mystery schools, was on the feminine side of not only sort of studying, but really perceiving the world. And in a way, the other half of the information, the masculine side of it, the right eye, was, in a sense, missing. And this was exactly what Akhenaten was meant to bring to the Egyptians, and the missing information that he was sent to replace, to bring back into the Akashic records, in order for humanity to be able once again to achieve immortality. And so during his very short reign, and obviously very violent and quite sad ending, he did manage to achieve his goal, which was that he managed to bring 300 Egyptians to become immortals. And in fact, a quick interesting side note that that Drunvalo mentions, which I have to say I haven't seen any other people talk about, but it's an interesting tidbit. Those 300 Egyptians then joined the Tat Brotherhood as no longer students of the mystery school, but actually, fully fledged immortals, as it were. And they waited there in Egypt for around 800 years. And according to Drunvalo, they then went to a small place in the Middle East called Mitzada. And there they actually began the Assyrian religion and culture with these 300 immortals as the sort of core group, and around them a much bigger following grew. So it's just interesting to think of these, for our story, those 300 Egyptians are completely meaningless and lost in time, although they were obviously an important part in this chain of events. But each of these little things sort of carries on and has its own story on the side that we very often miss or aren't aware of. So I just thought it was a curious little tidbit to share with you. But nevertheless, what was it that Akhenaten actually taught those 300 Egyptians? What was the information that he conveyed? And as we mentioned, it's the masculine perspective that was taught. And so the way that it was taught, and this I think is a very interesting point to make. Obviously, when we use the word taught, teach, as it is today, we usually, I think, imagine some form of schooling, of passage of information, through usually writing, meaning very little even intonation or beyond the actual written word. There's no more information. And that's usually what we think about it. And so that's a very, very specific kind of skill. And it's the skill, the ability to take something that you inherently understand or innately understand and be able to translate that understanding to the agreed upon language in such a way that someone else can understand you. Now, I'm not sure if that's a little confusing, but let's take an example just to see what I mean. And this is actually an example from Alan Watts. He worded this beautifully in one of his lectures. And if we think about making a fist, right? Children can make a fist. Anyone can make a fist. Monkeys can make a fist. But if I asked you to explain to me, or if I was an alien, how do you make a fist? All we can really say is, you make a fist. Just try and make a fist, and you'll make a fist. I mean, if you don't know what a fist is, then you can say, okay, you see what I'm doing? Now you do that. And that's all the explanation that you could really give. Whereas if we were forced to give a written, detailed report as to how a human brain, let's say, moves and controls the muscles in such a way to form a fist, it would nearly be beyond the ability to explain. Certainly, it would be a very long-winded explanation. And that is the price, the con of this form of studying, the studying which demands us to translate something which might be very, very simple in reality, i.e. making a fist, but to translate it into our language so another can understand becomes exceedingly difficult, if not impossible. And this is, again, very important to remember that this is only half. There are certain subjects, there are certain things that this form of studying, of being able to encode information in language and therefore not only preserve it for a later time, but actually pass it on to someone without being there, is a tremendous gift, is a tremendous ability, the ability to send scrolls to someone and give them a somewhat accurate representation, is an amazing ability. So this isn't good or bad. It's simply to realize that when we think about studying or when we think about explanation or proving something, there's usually more than one way to think about that. And so obviously, when we think about different types of information and learning, we really can think about how these different ways and different methods apply. So if we take music, for example, one of the ways to teach music would be literally to play music. And if you go and listen to someone playing music for long enough, you will start to learn you'll start to recognize what they're doing, you'll start to remember it, and eventually you'll start to be able to do a certain amount of it, or if you practice, to understand it in a different way. So obviously one of the simplest forms of learning is simply by watching and imitating, and this is how we all start out. The only form of learning that we have before we know language is to watch and imitate and try it ourselves and eventually become better. So that's one form that we can think of. Obviously, in most music schools, conversely, there is a lot of sitting down at the desk and writing or copying or studying the history of music, etc., etc. So it's an interesting thought. But having said all of that, what we're talking about here is a mystery school. And this is something that I think is interesting because most of us, I believe, don't really know what you would teach in a mystery school or in shamanic teaching or in any of these sort of, I don't know what to call them, but like occult subjects that aren't quite passed on in the same way through our left hemisphere, through our rational thought. And so this is actually what Drunvalo tells us. The way that these mystery schools, that the Left Eye of Horus mystery school in Egypt taught, was actually a lot by using visualization. And so visualization, we've mentioned a few times before, but we haven't spoken about it deeply. And I think maybe we should dedicate an episode to it sometime. I'm pretty sure we all know about it to a certain degree, but it's a really fascinating phenomenon that, again, is very connected with the idea of thought and the power of thought that we've spoken about. Visualization, as we all know, is basically imagining something. So if I close my eyes and I see an image, that's me visualizing. Now, the power of visualization over the years obviously has suffered tremendously for its credibility. Basically, anything you imagine is not real. Imagination is the antithesis of reality, and therefore anything you imagine has no impact on reality. I'm not saying that. That's been the consensus for humanity for a long, long time. And recently, I think over the last 50 years more or so, we've been becoming increasingly aware of the importance of the mental state, and that the visualization that someone has or does actually can affect their emotional state, and from that their physical state, quite a lot. And this can go in both ways. Obviously, the easiest, I think, example for this is the whole phenomenon of, in medicine, when you have any kind of placebo effect that's then encouraged or enhanced with a doctor's confirmation or saying that it isn't true. So if a doctor comes to someone with a placebo, if the doctor tells them they've received this brand new medicine that's showing very good results, they'll have a higher chance of healing from the placebo effect. And if the doctor comes and says, we actually made a mistake and we gave you the wrong medicine, you might be experiencing some dangerous symptoms, then those symptoms have a higher chance of appearing. So this is all part of this whole world of imagination, and we can think of a lot of examples. I'll just give one quick one, which was interesting to me, it's just one of those interesting paradoxes that we had, or mistakes that we made. It used to be that for children, and even for adults, they would say, if you get angry, you should go and punch a punching bag and let out your aggression and frustration on the punching bag. And that way you'll sort of let it all out. And when you come back, you'll be more calm. But that isn't quite the case. And they discovered that to a certain extent with some people, if you get into the habit of going to punch a punching bag every time you get angry, you're actually teaching your body, your consciousness, your psyche, that that's the way you behave. I get angry, I punch a punching bag. Something upsets me, I get angry, I punch a punching bag. And this won't diminish the actual tendency that you have to lose your temper. Whereas if we imagine the opposite, obviously in a healthy way, where when you become angry, as they do in anger management, you start recognizing it. You start bringing your awareness to it. You start regaining your control and saying, I recognize that I'm angry now, and I will let it be, but I will also let it pass. Then not acting upon those instincts can actually have a much more powerful effect on changing our behavior and our psyche in general. So a way to think about all of these things is just it's interesting to see how we've changed in our perspective, even things like placebo. So having said all of that, the world of visualization obviously got most of its famous recognition from the world of New Age, where suddenly humanity rediscovered this phenomenon, this ability that had existed for many, many years throughout all cultures. All practitioners were quite aware of the power of visualization to impact the real quote-unquote world. Okay, I can see that there's a few things in chat that I've just missed. So I'm not sure if any of it, because I did see someone tagging me specifically, but there's been a lot going on before. Oh, okay, that's nothing to do with the show. I'm familiar with EFT, emotional freedom technique. Okay, yes, I am. It's interesting. I have a lot to say about that technique, and I actually have a very close friend who is a very big proponent of it and has had very good experiences with it. But I'm actually not going to go into it now because I've already wasted nearly half the episode and we haven't come anywhere close to talking about what we're here for. So I'm going to try and reel it in. But do share your thoughts. And in fact, I'd like to hear what you have to say. Do you have any experience with EFT yourself, or is it just something that you sort of, like me, that you've just read about? But I will continue nonetheless because we really have a lot to cover, and I'm just there's so much to say. Okay. So the power of visualization was and is still today mostly used consciously for some kind of work in this, mystical sense. And I personally had a very powerful experience with a man that I met in India, a couple, and he spoke very, very little English, and we couldn't quite converse, freely. But we had a good time. It was very cordial. We, as best we could, sort of chatted very barely, until he said the name. Oh my gosh, Trismegistus. Oh my gosh, I completely blanked on the name. Sorry, Trismegistus. How did he pronounce it? Hermes Trismegistus. He had an Italian accent. I'm trying to do the accent. I can't remember how exactly it sounded, but that name sort of caught my attention, and suddenly we had something to bond with, and we talked about it. And he told me his experiences with the visualization, and he was he had very powerful and interesting experiences and stories, and he told me about how he actually healed people from afar, and was quite well versed in this technique, shall we say. And it was the first time that I really spoke with someone about their conscious abilities, and still got the feeling that they didn't see themselves, and I didn't see them as something uniquely special. The way that he presented it and the way that he talked about it was so matter-of-factly of, yes, of course, if you close your eyes and imagine someone and then imagine some emotion towards them, that impacts that person. And to me, that was I was in a very emotional state and a very open state as well. I'm sure if I had been more cynical, I could have easily missed that opportunity. But it did leave quite a strong impact in this suddenly epiphany of, oh my gosh, what if it really were that simple and we just try and complicate things and tell ourselves that it couldn't possibly be that easy. So, just a thought and a small story about visualization in general. But that really brings us to what the Egyptians were doing in the mystery school, and they were obviously taught with words and told what to visualize and how to visualize it and why, etc., etc. But the actual work and really the actual learning and studying and absorbing of the information was done through these visualizations. And so that's what we're going to talk about now. these visualizations were, I don't know if designed or, were brought forward in order to attempt to emulate basically the creation of reality, the creation of this universe that we inhabit. And that sounds quite bombastic, I'm sure, but we've mentioned the creation of the universe a few times, and I hope that we come to this fully prepared for what they say. But it's actually a very interesting story, because when we think about the story of creation, obviously what we've mentioned, what we all know, there's the Big Bang. It started as a tiny point and then exploded, etc., etc. But that model doesn't offer any explanation. It doesn't actually talk about any kind of narrative or progression. It mentions this point as the starting point, and then for some reason that we can't possibly explain, something changed, a drastic change that was basically the cause of creation. And I'm not saying in any way that that model is insufficient, but it's only used for certain things. And the Egyptians come and offer another model. I don't think it contradicts or is mutually exclusive in any way. But in fact, the Egyptian model, as Drunvalo mentions very clearly, is very, very similar to the Judeo-Christian narrative of the story of creation. We're going to see how it overlaps later. But the basic question that the story, I should say, guides us with this narrative is, how did it happen? How did creation happen? How was there nothing, if there was nothing, and then something, and sort of what was the process? And this was the thing that really touched me when I learnt about it, because that question in itself forces us to visualize, forces us to imagine, and forces us to think about this in a very, very different way. Because once again, we have to imagine what, in a way, it could be like to be non-human, to be without a physical form. Because obviously, at the beginning of creation, before atoms, there was no physical form. So what could that have been like? And this is where our narrative that the Egyptians basically followed kicks in. And so, as most of us agree, the thing started with a void. And that's always the first beginning, the space within which things can happen, the canvas, as it were. But when we say space, we usually think of outer space, because outer space is also a void of sorts. It's a vacuum. There's nothing in it. It's empty. But within space as a whole, there's the whole universe. So the universe resides in, the points between the spaces, as it were. But this void that we're mentioning is actually a void of absolutely nothingness. So we can't possibly imagine something like that. But in order for us to continue, we're going to call it that complete void. Anything that you can imagine is non-existent. And the only thing that exists, I don't even know if we can say within, but besides this void, is what Drunvalo calls spirit. Which brings us back again to this idea that consciousness and spirit precedes the physical reality. And if we think about the void and we think about the Big Bang explanation that there was nothing and then there was something, that feels like there's a missing link. Reality doesn't work in this sporadic way. It always has this cause and effect. If there was nothing and then there was something, we need something in the middle to connect the two. And for us, and for Drunvalo, this something, this missing link is spirit. But that doesn't actually answer the question yet, just to say that there was spirit. How did spirit create reality? How did spirit do anything if it's inside this void? And so if we imagine once again what it's like for spirit to be surrounded by void, I should say, we have to imagine that there is not only no physical objects, but there's no point of reference. And if there's no point of reference, then there's actually no motion at all. There's no change, there's no concept of something different, right? That's the point of absolute unity, but it's also the inhibitor of anything, of any kind of change from happening. And so the first thing that spirit could possibly do was something that must be innate to spirit. And here Drunvalo brings another subject that is quite an interesting one. We've mentioned something similar before, but this is very crucial to the process. So we're going to take a moment just to understand what this means to us. And Drunvalo mentions an ability that all humans have, that consciousness has, which is, I'm going to call it, it's a kind of sonar. And the way that Drunvalo describes is that it's this sort of beam of energy that will go off in a certain direction, but it will only go for a certain distance. Now, it's very important to remember that that distance changes from person to person. And this, in a way, is tied into our aura, to our energy field, and the more potent that field is, because the healthier or more aligned it is, the further out that energy field reaches. But regardless of any of those things in the auras, all we need to know is that we have this energy beam that is protruding, that can protrude from our body. And Drunvalo describes it as the ability that we have, or that some humans might show, that when you are in a completely dark room without your other senses, you can sometimes have this sort of sixth sense of knowing objects that are in the room, or if someone is in the room. And part of that is this ability that we have to project forward, to sort of know what's happening in the near vicinity. Now, when Drunvalo is talking about this, it isn't actually just one beam that comes out of us. The origin of these beams is the pineal gland, the famous third eye in the center of our head, not the actual center, the top half, but the center between the eyes, I should say. And from this point, there are actually three lines, or three beams, that go out, which are pointing in 6 directions. And so if that's the center point, we have one going straight ahead, straight behind, one to the left, one to the right, one to the top, and one down the spine to the bottom. And so these 6 beams are sort of part of the consciousness, the spirit that we are talking about. We still have it today, according to Drunvalo. Now, as some of you may have picked up and noticed, this actually correlates to the very famous 6 directions that are not only a big part of science and our physical reality, but in fact were a concept that's very famous and discussed in many different cultures and mystery schools. The very, very fundamental idea of the 6 directions and the awareness of those 6 directions. For us, obviously, it's the 4 directions of the wind, the north, south, east, west, and then up and down. But in terms of spirit in the void, those 6 directions don't have any point of reference. And so when we're talking about inside the void, this is exactly what spirit did, as this was the only thing that it could do, which was project these beams. Now, a curious, but I think rational, logical, in my mind, quality that these beams have is that they are all the same length. So if you can project your beam, a meter, it will be a meter in all 6 directions. If you can do it an inch, it'll be an inch. If you do it whatever other metric, then that's what it will be. So this is a very important point to make, which means that when consciousness, when spirit projected these 6 beams in all the directions, they were exactly equal in their length. And so what happens when you do that? And I should mention this now. This is a slightly more visual based information, because this is sacred geometry at its most sort of base, the beginning of sacred geometry, I will see. But nevertheless, I feel that this information is still important and available to understand solely through my words and through listening. So I do need to mention that for those who would like a visual representation, you can follow along with this explanation if you have a piece of paper, pencil or pen and a compass, or if you can do a pretty rough sketch of a circle, then you should be okay. And if you would like I'm actually going to add to the to the chat here and to the podcast episode a link to a YouTube video where there's a wonderful visual representation of this process. Now, this is the videos of spirit science, which I've mentioned before. They don't talk about everything that we're going to be talking about now, but just to understand the basic pattern and the image, he does a very good job of it. So I've linked that in the chat, and I will put that in the podcast's comments as well. So, once Spirit projected these 6 beams in all these directions, it sort of had this shape that it could form, whereby it can connect those 6 points together. And when you connect those 6 points, you get a few different shapes that you can see. You can get sort of 2 triangles, you can get a diamond as they're connected to the base, or if you turn it to a certain perspective, you can actually see a cube, as it were, on its side. And so this is the first shape, as it were, that Spirit was able to create out of no point of reference. And this is really the crucial thing here, is that along this process, you can only add from what's already existent, because there is literally nothing else. This is perhaps the only instance of creating from scratch. So we have the 6 points that connect together to form a cube. Now from this cube, I said cube, this is all in 3-dimensional space, but it will help us also to visualize it 2-dimensionally. So I might switch from cube to square, from circle to sphere. It works in both ways. I'm going to try and keep the 2-dimensional part of it just to be more consistent. So instead of a cube, we're going to talk about this square that's formed. And from that square, consciousness can sort of project a beam straight up to create a pyramid. So if you stretch all of the lines towards the center at the top, they are again equidistant because it's starting from a square, and that forms a square-based pyramid, I think it's called, as opposed to a triangle-based pyramid. So we now have our second shape, and this shape, again, you can notice that we're going through the formation. We start with a cube, now we're onto a pyramid, and if we take that pyramid and flip it and sort of connect the bases, as it were, we get an octahedron, which is the next shape on our list. And now this octahedron is sort of the first shape that is completed around where Spirit is. And so the other shapes that were building up to it are sort of created in a way outside of where Spirit resides, if we're trying to visualize it. And then the octahedron is the first to engulf and encapsulate Spirit. And so this has now given us a point of reference to work from, meaning with this point of reference, Spirit can move. It can move in and out of the octahedron. It can go away for a certain distance, and meter that distance and then come back to it. So suddenly with this other point of perspective, motion is possible. And this is the beginning of a big change, basically. Now, after the octahedron is created, what Spirit didn't, I want to remind us again that all of these instructions that we're going through and these patterns that we're making, this is what the Egyptian students of the mystery school were visualizing during their studies. So they would literally sit there and visualize in their mind these shapes, these motions that Spirit was going through. And so the next instruction, as it were, that was from that was that they needed to spin the octahedron one time over each of the axes. And so there are all of these connecting lines. And this is a little complex to really visualize. If you want to do it later, you can always take a piece of paper. And again, the video will be very much clearer to explain it. But basically, if you take that octahedron and spin it exactly over each of the axes one time, you get in the end a circular shape that forms around it, which creates this sphere, this perfect sphere. Now, these instructions are not only sort of metaphysical and mystical methods, but part of sacred geometry, or I should say, one of the elements of it is that you can always make the shapes from sacred geometry with only a ruler and a compass. You don't need to measure anything. You don't need to do any algebra or any geometry in order to create these shapes. And this, constraint, which is somewhat curious, is really emphasized here in this thought of spirit being in a void with nothing else. And how do you create a perfect sphere if you have no point of reference, if you have nothing else to start from? Okay, and so this is the description that we're going through here. Now, what we've witnessed here is a transformation from the octahedron to the sphere. Now, as we've spoken about before, in sacred geometry, the different shapes have different tendencies, as it were, and generally speaking, straight lines are considered masculine, the yang, and curved lines are considered the feminine, yin. And so the cube is the epitome of the masculine shape, and the sphere is the epitome of the feminine shape. And so what we did here is we went from the cube and transformed it into a sphere. And that's one direction to go. And Drunvalo is very adamant in emphasizing that this is one way of doing this and of achieving this pattern. This is not the only way, and this is not the only method, but this was the method that was chosen because this was sort of the method that utilized the masculine perspective, the cube, the straight lines, in order to achieve this end pattern. So that's why that was this path that they took, going through the cube, the pyramid, and then the octahedron to finally translate, as it were, into a sphere, the feminine shape. Now, a small side note is that this story seems to wink, and this is an interpretation that Drunvalo says for the Adam and Eve story, what is meant by Adam being created first and then taking a rib from Adam and putting it and using it to create Eve. This is the description of taking the masculine root and creating the masculine first and translating or transforming that into the feminine. So that's just a little tidbit. So at this point, we have a sphere. And a sphere is a very good place to start from because it's also much more easy for us to visualize, I think. So once spirit consciousness had this sphere created, it basically continued with this methodology of creating more complex and intricate shapes. And so what it did, it was obviously, can be anywhere. It moved to the surface of the sphere. If we imagine the sphere as a bubble, the skin, it moved to the edge of that sphere. And that edge became the center point. And from that edge, it sort of produced the same cycle again, starting from the cube, and created another sphere, which was, again, this second sphere was centered around the edge of the first sphere. So if we're trying to imagine it, I'm just going to take a moment because this is slightly more important. We can imagine a circle, and then if we sort of imagine that there are two circles on top of each other and we slide them across, you can even do this in your fingers really, until they are intersecting exactly at the midpoint. And so one circle goes through the midpoint of another. And this was the second shape that spirit created. Now, this shape is a very important one, or a very interesting one, I should say, to study, because we have created our first shape. And this is part of sacred geometry. If you take these two shapes, which are spheres, so it's only one type of shape, and you double it and then reconnect it in a different way, we have now created a new shape that wasn't there before. And this shape is the sort of part that's cut out of the two spheres that's connected together. And if you were visualizing it, you could see it's a sort of, not exactly like a drop, but a little bit like an ellipse with pointy ends, more or less. And this shape has actually a name in sacred geometry. It's called the Vesica Pisces. And in fact, if you know the astrological sign for Pisces, for the fish, then that is really a kind of Vesica Pisces with the added drawings on the side. Now, this shape is a very important shape, and I have to admit that when I first studied it, it took quite a long time. I guess studying shapes in general is a rather difficult subject to really pick up because it's not the same as just reading a book. It's sort of being able to see and understand more of it. So I say that because we will be going into the Vesica Pisces a lot more in the future. It's a very, very important shape. And Druvalo even mentions that this is something we're going to be getting back to much more deeply, but not at this point. For us now, it's enough to say that this is a shape that's created by the combination or the creation of a new sphere on top. And what's important for us to know is, again, this pattern that emerges, which is every time that spirit moves and creates something new, it actually is creating more knowledge, more information in these systems. And so if we think about it in that way, we have one circle, because even in two-dimensional it works, and we take another circle and we put them across each other. That's all we've really done. But that's saying all we've really done is not quite understanding what sacred geometry is about. Sacred geometry is about the information that's encoded within these shapes, be it the proportional informations or the actual information of the shape itself or the interrelation between the shapes. All of that is information that, the same as any language, if we don't understand the language, we probably can't understand what it means. But if we understand the terminology, the language, the alphabet, etc., we can see a lot of information and meaning that we can derive from this further. So we're not going to go into all of it in this sitting. Actually, I can see that we're very close to the end of the episode and we haven't quite finished yet. But it is important to say that with every step that we take, every creation that spirit creates is actually unfolding more of this information, this hidden information, and bringing to light more of the wisdom that can be found in sacred geometry. Okay, we've got a few more. I think we'll be able to maybe finish this because the rest of it is relatively simple to continue. So we have these two spheres, and they have created this shape called the Vesica Pisces in the middle. Now, at this point, spirit goes to another surface on those spheres. And in fact, when we are trying to draw this ourselves, it would help us to think about it as the point where the two spheres intersect. There's 2 points like this at the top and at the bottom. And those 2 points can become the center of the next sphere that's projected. So if you're drawing this at home and you're carrying on, we have a first sphere that we make anywhere at any size. It's only important that we remain with the same size and we create another sphere where the center of the second sphere is on the edge of the first. And now those two spheres intersect and we take that point as the center of the next sphere that we create. Now, once we create that next sphere, we actually create this sort of pattern. It's a rounded pattern, but we can see that it holds 4 triangles and 1 large one. And these are actually, we should call them tetrahedrons because they're 3-dimensional, but this is another part of sacred geometry. The triangles themselves, because we're drawing circles, appear curved. But in fact, if you take the points where they intersect, you can draw the straight line with a ruler, and then you see very clearly how those 4 triangles fit into place and actually are proportional and identical to each other. Once again, this is a whole system of information concerning the star tetrahedron, which we are not going to get into now, but again, another sphere, another projection, another unveiling of information. Now, at the end of each of these cycles, spirit sort of moves forward to the next point and then projects another sphere. And if we do this, as we go around the circle, we keep going to the next point that was an intersection, and that is the center of the next sphere. We go all the way around until we create 6 spheres. And those 6 spheres around create a pattern, which I'm not sure if I've actually shown it. I think, yeah, we have talked about it before. This is actually the first pattern of the 4 famous shapes that we spoke about, ending with the flower of life. Sorry, the fruit of life. And this is the first shape pattern of those, which is called the seed of life, the beginning. Now, we mentioned how the seed is a metaphor also for all of these placements of these different shapes. But here we can take that quite literally. Another name for it is the Genesis pattern. This is the first pattern, the initialization, the seed, the Genesis, because it's the first pattern that can be created. It's the only pattern that has to be created before spirit can move on and do other things. And so that's why this shape is a very important shape. I can't believe that I actually have gone through the whole episode and I haven't brought any picture. Anyone here, come and check online. Genesis pattern, the seed of life. It's very simple, but it's basically those 7 spheres, and inside the flower of life, we see the seed of life. We see this Genesis pattern. The flower of life, in a certain way, is the continuation of the seed of life, the continuation of it with the same pattern, only repeated more times. So, okay, wow, 5 minutes, excellent. You know what, we're going to stop there. That's actually the end of this part, so I'm glad we got to it. We might have skipped over a few parts in the end, but we're going to be coming back to this information more in the future, the actual information that was unfolded within these, these different levels that were going on. Okay, and I can see the chat has been bustling since I left, so let me just have a quick look and see if there's anything that I missed. Sorry. The Clockwork Elf, some stuff about 3D time space. Who's that? Okay. Yes. The Vesca Pisces, the Jesus fish, and the vagina. Yes, the small piece of flower of life. And again, it's a. Well, yeah, we'll get into it more. The actual shape and its significance. It's a very, very fundamental, basic shape. I read that your RNA holds your memories. Your cells have memories. Yes. Well, interesting. Thank you. Rondon has just shared the shape, and we can see actually the exact process that we described going through the different patterns to make the Genesis pattern. Thank you for that, Rondon. Thank you, Mariano. Yes, I do want to say, because last week, Darsika, I don't know if you were here. Not last week, it was 2 weeks ago. But last episode, we spoke a little bit about memory. Was it last episode? I think it was last episode. And we talked about it. So memory is an interesting thing, because we have our conscious memories, which are the things that we actually retain and sort of change over time. We have our subconscious memories, things like traumas that we've suppressed or anything that's ever happened. We have physical memories, which we call muscle memory. So that's not even DNA, that's just the physical attributes of the muscle. If you do something, your muscle eventually remembers how to do that. And again, we're using the word memory to describe very, very different things. So if we're going to find something that holds all of those definitions together, it's really imprint. Memory is what we call the imprint that's left. And so according to that definition, everything has this ability to leave an imprint and to have an imprint. Any interaction, regardless, is going to be leave some sort of imprint, whether we're conscious of it or not. Okay, sorry, that was had nothing to do with the rest of the episode, but I just wanted to give my 2 cents. Yes. Cells dividing, actually mitosis, absolutely. This, yes, it's interesting that you said that, because, well, first of all, the cell division, which we've also mentioned before, reaches the same Genesis pattern through spheres, more easily seen, and that's the shape that cells divide. All cells divide in order to create life. So the Genesis pattern still appears there, but the process that it takes to get there is different. And the reason it can do that is because the initial sphere, the egg, is fertilized with something from the outside. So there's something else to start this process, to spark it. With spirit and with this the void in the beginning, there's nothing else to interact with, and that's why it had to be done sort of on its own. Okay, wow. We've just reached the end. I hope you enjoyed the episode. It's been an absolute pleasure, as always. I would like to thank you very, very much for joining me for another episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I do. And I will see you all in the next episode, whenever that may be. No, next week. Until then, have a great one. Bye.